So please be seated. We are right on time. Let's get started. We are at a critical time, a tipping point to have a deal for nation people or not. We appreciate that the presidency and the host country, as well as all parties, have put in hours of work day and night, not only in the past few weeks, but also all the 4 years we have traveled from COP15 to now. We have all received the draft decision submitted by the president, the non-paper on the entire package. So with this WWF panel, we would like to share with you what is our assessment and our asks. Join me on I am Lin Li, Senior Director of Global Policy Advocacy of WWF International. To my right, Marco Lampertini, Director General of WWF International. Further, Vishesh Upal, Director of Governance, Law and Policy, WWF India. And further, Mr. Guido Broekhoven, Head of Policy and Research and Development, WWF International. Now the floor is yours, Marco.
Lynn, thank you very much and welcome, and thank you for attending, everyone, and online as well. So let me start with highlighting from a WWF perspective what we think we have and what we think we should be fighting to keep in the current text. First of all, we celebrate the inclusion of an overarching goal, halting and reversing biodiversity loss by 2030. This is enormously important because it's the first time that we have a measurable mission for biodiversity, the equivalent of the 1.5 degrees for climate. And it's vital to catalyzing action towards a nature-positive world, driving action from government, businesses, society, and hold them accountable. The train towards a nature-positive world where we have more nature than today is ready to depart. And I cannot underscore enough the importance of having such a clarity at the top of the global biodiversity framework. The second element that we welcome very strongly is the 30 by 30, the 30% by 2030 target on spatial conservation. It's ambitious, as science demands, is measurable, is comprehensive, and is inclusive. We welcome the inclusion of inland waters, coastal and marine areas in the target, and also we welcome the recognition of indigenous and traditional territories as well as the explicit reference to respecting the rights of indigenous people and local communities. So this is a major progress from where we were just recently, and it's great that it is in the text and it should stay as it is. We're also greatly pleased to see gender equality strongly secured in the GBF as well. Now, to the until now very contentious resource mobilization element of the GBF. First of all, we note the recognition of the size of the overall biodiversity finance gap in $700 billion, and we are encouraged to see a clear reference to the elimination of harmful subsidies and the redirection towards sustainable practices. We welcome the fact that parties are converging on a satisfactory resource mobilization package from all sources. And we welcome also the overall $200 billion goal for biodiversity conservation. Specifically, the reference to $20 billion by 2025 and $30 billion by 2030, respectively, of international financial flows to developing countries is roughly a tripling of current levels. And it is, in many ways, a significant advance, but still a low bar given the amount of resources that we know are needed to implement an ambitious GBF, obviously with particular reference to developing countries. But we also welcome proposals that have been captured by the text of various mechanisms to assist with timely and accessible distribution of resources. Another positive dimension in the text is that there is a clear recognition of nature-based solutions and ecosystem-based approaches. This is important to connect the nature and climate agenda and reflects the recognition of this approach in other agreements that has been signed and sealed during the year. And that's really important to integrate action that benefits biodiversity, climate, and society at the same time. So these are perhaps the key highlights of what really we think is strong and should stay in the text. Let me now move to some top lines of what we think is actually rather weak or could create loopholes or add inappropriate timelines that are not commensurate with the scale of ambition of the overall GBF, in particularly the mission. The gaps includes a measurability of the restoration target. The restoration target is a very important one. It complements the conservation one and the footprint one, but is not measurable enough due to the lack of agreement on a baseline to measure progress. The second area of concern is about preventing extinction. We feel that the target is not enough ambitious. In fact, it's even less ambitious than what the world committed in the previous biodiversity plan, the HE target, HE number 12, HE 12 years ago. And so this target needs to be clarified and strengthened. It feels like we are kicking down the road the commitment to halt extinction to 2050, and it's far too late, and we should take action to halt species extinction now. It's also concerning that the text does not include any numerical target in terms of reducing the global footprint of production and consumption. This has been another very contentious issue, but right now, although there is a reference to the right sectors and reference to the importance of reducing production and consumption footprint, the text is failing to give clear, measurable targets. And then finally, the implementation mechanism. It does contain some important elements, but it is presented as voluntary. And there isn't a clearly spelled out ratcheting mechanism to scale up actions over time during the reviews. And we think this is a significant weakness of the current test. But let me conclude by stressing this, and that is that whatever conversation is happening in the room with the ministers and whatever discussion on the text will progress during the day, two things absolutely cannot happen. The first one is that this conversation lead to lower ambition of what we see in the text presented by the presidency this morning. And second, it cannot lead to a breakdown of the negotiations. We need a sufficiently ambitious global biodiversity framework by the end of COP15, or else we will be not only giving up on the planet, but beginning to give up on ourselves. Thank you, and my pleasure to leave the floor to Bekesh.
Thank you, Marco. This is our overall assessment of the paper we have seen. Then we like to go dive into specificities. So I'd like to have Guido to point in a few key elements that we need to pay attention to. Guido, please.
Thank you very much. And I'll be focusing in particular on how the framework currently addresses the drivers of biodiversity loss. Pollution is one of the 5 key drivers of biodiversity loss. And we believe that target 7 on the reduction of pollution, and particularly halving the risk of pesticides and also addressing nutrients, sets a level of ambition that is sufficient to address this driver. The other important element there is transforming the productive sectors, in particularly agriculture. Agriculture is responsible for 70% of biodiversity loss. We particularly value the inclusion of agroecology as an approach to transform the agricultural sector. Agroecology is about transforming agricultural production that will work with nature rather than against nature. And it will deliver long-term benefits for people, food security, sustainable livelihoods, and for biodiversity. So the inclusion in the framework of that approach is incredibly important to address that driver of agriculture. Then behind the productive sectors, there is the finance and the investments in these sectors. And we appreciate that the framework includes the commitment to align financial flows with the specific goals and targets of the framework. So it is town-bound and it is specific linked to the other goals and targets of the framework. And finally, nature-based solutions are recognized in the framework as a clear articulation of the role that nature plays in addressing climate change and other societal challenges. Now, there's a number of areas where the framework needs to be strengthened when it comes to drivers, and I do want to reiterate the importance of numbers there. And the key lesson from Aichi was that measurable targets are incredibly important to actually see specific progress. And parties took that lesson on board when they started to develop this new framework a number of years ago. Unfortunately, they seem to have abandoned that approach now. The targets that address the drivers do not include specific numerical values and ambition to measure progress against the ambition. Target 10 on addressing the productive sectors talks about transforming towards sustainable production systems. It doesn't identify how much land would actually need to be covered by sustainable production methods. So that is a major loophole, we think, in transforming production systems into sustainable land use practices. On target 15, that addresses the role of businesses. Many businesses have actually asked to include mandatory requirements to disclose business-related risks and exposures to nature. That is not included in the target as being mandatory, and we think that is something where the framework needs to be strengthened. And furthermore, there's very vague language on actually what type of impact the business will need to achieve in terms of reducing its negative and increasing its positive impact. Then on consumption, the target number 16, there's no numerical ambition on sustainable production and consumption. Overconsumption should be eliminated and not just vaguely reduced. Finally, indeed, on the implementation mechanism, it is important to have an ambitious and clear timeline, a clear review process, followed by a ratcheting up of action over time. So really, again, to reiterate that further negotiations, they do need to land higher ambition, and they should not delay in adoption of the agreement. Parties have only 2 days left to conclude an ambitious agreement. Thanks.
Thank you, Guido. So we'll hear the specificities. One more specific point is also on the digital sequencing information. I'd like to have Vishesh to share our thoughts on that.
Thank you, Lynn. So I think this was one of the most contentious issues when we reached this COP, and I think it's good to hear that the parties have reached a good compromise. There is an explicit mention in Goal C and Target 13 of the GBF that benefits from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources will be shared fairly and equitably. So it is indeed good to see a consensus which will further the principles of equity and also benefit sharing. However, we are a bit concerned that the target 13 is not smart. It will be difficult to measure its progress. And also the fact that it does not mention that benefits should be provided to indigenous people and local communities who are the holders of traditional knowledge and also stewards of nature. However, the draft decision of the DSI does recognize the rights of indigenous people and local communities, including with respect to the traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources that they hold. There is also a clear recognition that specific and targeted capacity needs, technology transfer, technical cooperation is much needed and required, not only just for developing countries and small island developed nation states, emerging economies, but also we must support the capacity needs of indigenous people and local communities and others relevant stakeholders. It is also a good decision that monetary and non-monetary benefits arising from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources should support conservation and sustainable use, which are the first two pillars of the convention, as well as benefit indigenous people and local communities. Yes, we still have some way to go because the modalities of how these benefits will be shared and what will be the mechanism is still to be decided. So, the modalities for a global mechanism for benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information, including a multilateral fund, still has to be worked out, for which an ad hoc open ended working group will be established, and they would actually work out the whole modality and kind of take it up till the next COP. So we have COP16 where we will see exactly how this whole system will function. But I would say that by including DSI and stating that the substantial increase of fair and equitable sharing of benefit sharing is needed in the GPF has given a very clear message that effective implementation of the third objective of the convention is critical to achieve a just future for our planet and people. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishesh. So you hear our overall assessment, and then the negotiation from now on should only land all ambition higher than this, not lower than this. We know there's a balanced view, balanced elements in there. So that's really, in the next 2 days, that we'd like to see more ambition so we can go out Montreal with GBF that can guide us. So now I'm open the floor to questions. I will take a couple questions at one time. Please do introduce yourself and then your question. This gentleman here, please.
Juan Mayorga for Sin Embargo and the Earth Journalism Network. This question is for Mr. Guido Brockheffen, and it's regarding the footprint that it's so difficult to agree on regarding, in terms of getting rid of overconsumption. I mean, why is it so difficult? That's my question. Is it a technicality, or is this lack of political will considering the global inequalities in terms of consumption?
Thank you. Do I see other question? Yeah, this one, please. This gentleman, and you will be next round.
Atetsuji from Kyoto News. Can you give? You told me that the extinction target should be strengthened. What's your recommendation for that extinction target? And my question, the second question is DSI. Do you find any problem in current DSI text?
Okay, thank you. I think Guido, you take the first two, and Vishesh take a DSI question. The first one is about the footprint.
Yeah, thank you. Like all the other goals and targets, the goal on footprint is a global goal and on footprint. And obviously, one should recognize the huge inequalities that exist between countries and regions on the per capita footprint. I think indeed that one of the challenges is political will and vested interest in addressing that specific goal and the targets that underpin that goal. What we're talking about is transforming productive sectors. We realize that these are not easy to do. However, they can be done and they must be done. And I should also add that really achieving the agreement and further negotiating these elements towards higher ambition should take place urgently. Parties have had 4 years to negotiate. We've been here now for 2.5 years, and really, nature needs a framework well before Christmas.
Guido, the extinction.
Yeah, with the extinction target, the major risk there is that we're lowering ambition below what parties already committed to in 2010 for Aichi, where parties committed to halt species extinction by 2020. Accepting that that has not been achieved and that we just try again, not in 10 years, but maybe in 30 years, that is simply unacceptable. We all know extinction is forever.
Just follow up, you want to have some numerical target like Arch target for the extinction?
Is the timeline mainly is unacceptable that we propose such a long-term timeline of 2050. We need
Could you
to
give me
act
some example
2030.
of the figure?
2030.
Thank you.
Vishesh, DSI.
So, like as I have already mentioned, and you all also know that this was one of the very difficult topics, where you had to build consensus. So I think it's a good start. It's a good compromise document. And that is also a reason why the ad hoc open-ended working group has been established, because whatever issues there are, or whatever problems like you've mentioned, that is the expert group which will, I guess, meet and resolve all of those. So that's a good way ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next round of questions, this gentleman and that gentleman over there, please.
Hi, I'm Eric Pierre Champagne from La Presse in Montreal. In your opinion, what could be a deal breaker at this moment? What could be a deal breaker at this moment?
Let me take the next question as well. Please, gentleman over here.
Emilio Godoy, Interpress Service and the Earth Journalism Network. I've got a couple of questions. What are your thoughts about the erasure, it seems, of mandatory reporting for business on their impacts on biodiversity? And one of the failures of Aichi was the lack of how to achieve things. Do you see that mistake is being repeated here? And how could it be avoided, taking into account the urgency of the issues? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can take the mandatory then. Yeah, okay. So I will take the question about mandatory. So the progress business are coming here. They require government to give them a mandatory requirement to disclosure their impact on nature, because they have seen the risk of nature has been to their operation, to their business. So therefore, the business already asked. Government should not give lower what the business has asked. That's why we really propose mandatory disclosure of business should be included in the targets.
So on your point about the Aichi targets, I would add one of the issues, I think, with with Aichi targets would also the lack of measurability. One of the few Aichi targets that we actually achieved with 11, because it was measurable, was the protection target with 10% in the ocean and 17 on land. And now we are seeing again the lack of measurability on a number of targets, and that's a big concern. About your question on what is the deal breaker, or rather the deal maker, it's there are two issues that have been the most contentious from the beginning. One is the resource mobilization package, which seems to be now getting to convergent in terms of amounts, in terms of distribution, and in terms of mechanisms as well. There's still, I'm sure, differences, but hopefully the session that is ongoing right now will confirm that convergence. The second one is the footprint, as we mentioned earlier, and we would like to see that strengthened. So these are the two, I would say, principal areas of discussion, actually, from the very beginning of the negotiations.
Thank you. We have time only for the one round of questions. So, gentlemen here.
Thank you. My name is Johannes Blum, and I'm from the Finnish Public Broadcasting Company. And my question is especially about target number 7. In the non-text that was published today, there were no mentions anymore about the specific pollution sources that were there before, like light pollution and noise pollution that were named in the format draft. Do you find any problems with this, that there ain't that specific naming anymore? And also a second question, if I may. The wording turned out to be to reduce the risks of pesticide use, but not to reduce pesticide use itself. What do you think about this? Does this bring you any worries?
Thank you for your question. Maybe Guido, you can answer that question.
Yeah, thanks. We've certainly advocated for the inclusion of light and noise pollution. We're disappointed that it's been left out. In terms of reducing the risk of pesticide use rather than actually the amount of pesticide use, the challenge there is that pesticides have become more effective over the past years. So with fewer amount of pesticides, you can get the same damage than you get some time ago. So that's why the inclusion of actually looking at the risk than the amount rather than the amount is a better measure of progress. Thank you.
I think the time we were given is up. So we will say the most important thing is that we leave Montreal. We need, in the next few days, we need to have a GBF that we are proud of, that can guide us to hold and reverse the biodiversity loss by 2030, so that we can be nature positive and a people positive. So if you have more questions, and please do go to behind the green room, we're happy to discuss more. And thank you for your attention.